and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today we're going to talk about how your company or organization can use skills as the foundational basis for your talent processes, which would include hiring, talent retention, career development, and much more. We'll discuss how the key to making skills an effective and transformational capability is to manage your skills with what we call a capability matrix, as opposed to using a fixed skills ontology. And we'll share some examples of how this transformation can lead to substantial benefits for your organization, including better decision-making, new capabilities to hire and keep talent, increased diversity, and improved cost containment. This is me. I am Steve Fair, Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold AI. And I'm speaking with you today because the shift from making talent decisions based on resumes and job descriptions to making these decisions based on skills is probably the single most consequential change that we see in organizations today. It's even more important given the times we're in with all the significant economic disruption and uncertainty taking place. So it's an excellent time to make process changes for the better in any organization. So I know you want to know a little bit more about how this works, so let's dive in here. I do want to hear your questions. As the DJ had said, please put your questions in the bottom right. We'll have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to answer questions today. So go ahead and next slide, please. So first, a little bit about Eightfold. We are an artificial intelligence company, an AI company based in Silicon Valley. And we use very sophisticated technology, which is called deep learning artificial intelligence, to transform how enterprises are managing talent throughout the talent lifecycle, not just recruiting and hiring, but also internal mobility, retention, project marketplaces, skills development, and other use cases as well. Our AI approach is specifically designed to prevent bias and enhance diversity practices for the business. Please go ahead to the next slide. So why make a change at all? Why do something different? Well, we're going to talk about multiple different talent processes today, but I want to start by just considering hiring and recruitment because this is a process we're all familiar with. Some of us have been recruiters, many of us have been hiring managers, and all of us have been job candidates. So we all have experience with recruitment. And we all have not only experience, but probably all each have a horror story or two to tell. And why is that? Well, let's consider why. You can go ahead and click for me here, DJ. There's a number of reasons why resumes and job descriptions, and this question of how a candidate and a job description match each other, don't work. It just doesn't work very well. And here are the reasons why these limitations exist. First is keywords. Often resumes are being evaluated using keywords and keyword matching. And this old way of evaluating is very limited. So for example, let's consider if you need to hire a Java engineer. Java is a programming language. So you may match a keyword for Java. But there is a context issue there because Java is also a common word for coffee, and there are 1,000 coffee shops that have the word Java in them. So if someone worked there as a barista, you may pick them up by accident. There's many other examples that could take place as well. Now, there's also an issue with skills. If you need a Java engineer, that person may indicate that they know Java, but do they know it well enough to fit your needs? Or do they just know it in passing? And how can you match the job description approved by the hiring manager? Well, whether that person is familiar with Java or an expert with Java, you really don't have any way to tell just from a resume. You might try to use a skill test, which is possible, but that may not work for another kind of skill. Suppose you need someone who has a digital marketing skill or management skill. Very hard to test for that. And there's a closely related issue of trust. Keywords and depth of skills are hard enough with traditional skills, and even harder given that people can, well, let's just come right out and say it, they can lie, they can fib. Someone can claim, yeah, I may not have studied Java, but I'm a pretty good engineer. I'll figure it out once I get into the job if I need to. People have an incentive to list as broad a set of skills as possible. And frankly, on the hiring side, there's an incentive to list as many requirements as possible, which makes the resume and job description hard to use and hard to trust on both sides. There's also an issue of bias with this traditional approach. Job descriptions often use words that unintentionally signal a preference for age or for gender. Think about all the job descriptions you've seen that say something like, we're looking for a go-getter, or we're looking for a ninja. Words like that have been proven to discourage female candidates as compared to male candidates. Or if the job description says it's a perfect career-building opportunity, you may be expressing an age bias. Not intentionally, but that's what ends up happening on the other end. And resumes by definition indicate gender and age. And resumes in Europe traditionally include a photo. These are factors that can trigger bias and can limit the ability to hire candidates from all underrepresented groups, and more importantly, limit the ability to hire based on what someone can do, because that's what matters. You're not trying to hire someone based on who they are, but on what they could do. And all of these issues have interpretation, recall, reading. Recruiters can have a quota of 1,500 resumes a day to review. It's impossible to read 1,500 resumes in a day, let alone recall what was on these resumes and understand it. So if the fifth resume you looked at in the course of the day was the one that mattered, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to understand that. All of which suggests that we need to take a new approach. These simply don't work. In fact, if you hit next a couple of times, DJ, we'll show you exactly what we think about resumes and job descriptions here at Eightfold. We have a saying about these. We say that resumes are bad, and we say that job descriptions are useless because of all of these problems around recall and precision and bias and so forth. All right, so this is the moment at which I wish we were in person. I wish we could all be together in one place, because when I put this slide up in front of a group of talent professionals, it gets a round of applause. So if you feel like applauding, please stand up and applaud. Exercise is good for you. That's absolutely the right way to feel. And when you think about it, it actually makes no sense that we're still using resumes and job descriptions as the basis of hiring. These are ancient technologies. The resume was first used famously by Leonardo da Vinci in 1482. So if you look around wherever you are, if you look up from the screen, if you, like me, are sitting in your living room, is there any other technology that you see around you that is 500 years old other than a resume? There's probably nothing in your house that is 500-year-old technology, and yet we still use it as the basis of hiring. Probably one of the most significant and important things that we can do as professionals, and one of the most important factors in our lives is our employment. So these are not technologies that are fit for purpose, and they're not technologies that we should still have to depend on today in 2020 in a digital world. So we want to unleash the potential of each person. If we can go to the next slide. We want to change how we hire, change how we manage talent, and hire for potential and promote for growth. This is why you need to start to hire with skills. This enables you not only to look at what someone is doing today, but what they can do in the future, and overcome these limitations on understanding. Overcoming the challenges of keywords with misunderstanding and lack of trust is to use skills. Now, perhaps you already have tried this in the past. So you can go ahead, DJ, and just click here, because many companies that I've spoken to have tried to use skills in the past. But it's not succeeded for them because they are using a skills ontology to try to understand skills rather than a capability matrix. So let's get into this, why a capability matrix is what you're going to need rather than a skills ontology. That skills ontology approach doesn't quite work as a database of skills. If we jump to the next slide here, we'll see why. I'll go ahead and click again here, DJ. The issue here is that a skills ontology is something like this. It's a large database that's fixed in place. So it's like a dictionary. And look, a dictionary is not nothing. It's got all the skills in it, right? But it's not transformative because it's fixed in place. It isn't automatic. It doesn't update automatically. It doesn't have enough classifications or context. So if you've tried using a skills-based talent process in the past and it hasn't succeeded, this is the reason why. You set up this skills ontology, and then perhaps you asked your hiring managers to, in addition to writing the job description, list out all the skills they need for the job. Well, that might not have worked very well because they were using drop-down menus, and it wasn't really actionable for them. And if you asked your employees to list out the skills on their profile manually, perhaps you got 30 or 40% compliance. It didn't reach the threshold you needed. If you ask job candidates to list the skills that they have to be recruited, the same issue applies. So all of this manual effort doesn't prove to be transformative, which is why you need something fundamentally different called a capability matrix to address these needs that are not addressed with the skills ontology. There are 5 specific reasons why. So if we go ahead to the next slide, we can illustrate why a capability matrix exceeds a skills ontology and gives you that fundamental capability. We'll dive into all of these in a little more detail, but these reasons in brief are that the skills that exist have just exploded in terms of the number of skills, and it's ever increasing. The relationships between skills and roles are multidimensional and can't be handled with simple classifications, and these complexities mean that automation is critical. Definitions evolve over time as well as the relationship between skills and roles, and there are additional contexts that are needed as well. All right, so let me do this. Let me ask if we can go to the next slide. So the number of skills has exploded. So I'm very curious here, before we actually click next, let me see what you all think. So go ahead and tell me how many skills you think there are. How many unique skills there are in the world here today? Let me get some indication. Okay, go ahead and just put them in the Q&A. What do you think the number of skills are? All right. Well, if you go ahead and click next, we'll give the answer to everybody. So if you guessed more than 1 million skills, that's the right answer. Yeah, 1.4 million skills. That's how many we've detected at Eightfold. And to give you some sense of the context of what 1.4 million is, we click next. If you had $1.4 million bills, that stack would be as tall as the Transamerica Pyramid here in San Francisco Bay Area, this famous tower. So 1.4 million is a large number. Although maybe looked at another way, $1.4 million bills is not going to buy you a house with this Transamerica Pyramid in view, unfortunately. Anyway, that's a separate issue. 1.4 million skills in the world. It is a tremendously large number. So if we go ahead and click next, we can see the relationship between skills and roles, which have a lot of dimensions. So this is another challenge around understanding skills. I wanted to use cooking as an example because I think it's very accessible. We all know how to cook to some extent, but what does that actually mean? In a professional or job context, what does cooking mean? For example, if someone has cooking skills as a short order cook, perhaps working at a Denny's restaurant, that's very different from a Michelin-starred restaurant that serves fine cuisine. Those are very different skills, but they're both cooking. A chain restaurant with a fixed menu and very rigid practices for assembling a dish is very different from a farm-to-table restaurant, which may have a different menu every day. Let's see Hunan or Szechuan Chinese cuisine. Those are very different cuisines. If you can cook one, can you cook the other? And what about all the hundreds and hundreds of other national and regional specialties? There's a difference between being a barbecue expert and being a vegetarian cook. The two may be completely different. And there's a difference between cooking for 5 people like at home and cooking for 500 like in a catering context. And on and on. So just from this one concept of cooking, we can see that there's a huge amount of nuance. And in fact, cooking is not really a skill. Cooking as a word represents potentially hundreds of different skills that we can see in great detail when we look at all these different dimensions. So this helps to explain why there are more than 1 million unique skills in the world. So from just this one concept of cooking, there's a huge amount of context that's required. So if we go to the next slide, there's another issue as well that is lost in a skills ontology, and that's going to be understanding some of the complexities among skills. So you can see here some examples. But if we think about understanding that, for example, someone knows calculus, we can assume that they also know algebra, but the reverse is not necessarily true because calculus is a more advanced form of mathematical understanding. In another case, if someone knows one skill, we could assume that they may know another because those two are so commonly seen together. For example, if someone knows cascading style sheets, we can assume that they know HTML. And you know what? The reverse of that may also be true. There's also learnability. If you know one skill, it may be very easy to learn another. One I've observed in my own career is that someone who's very good at enterprise sales is going to be very good at corporate partnerships as well. And then there's the relationships between roles and jobs. If you're in a certain job for a certain period of time, how long does it take to gain the skills within that job? So there's a lot of complexity in this aspect as well. We can go to the next slide. So you can go ahead and click 4 times here, DJ. There's definitions of skills evolving as well over time. So if we think about some of the technologies that we are all starting to use today, these also affect what skills mean, in addition to what the roles that underlie those skills mean. For example, if we have Blue Apron, many of us are using Blue Apron meal prep kits. Does that make us good enough at cooking to become a chef and get paid for it? I don't know the answer, candidly, but it's an important question to ask, and there's many examples like this. Thinking about programming, anyone who has the ability to search very well today, use tools like GitHub, use Google and the search engine capabilities there, can become a much better programmer, which is something that was not necessarily true 20 years ago in programming because those tools didn't exist. I started my career as a copy editor. Many years later, gosh, I don't want to think about how many, but many years later, an editor and a copy editor is a very different job because there are much better tools that automatically help all of us be better editors of our own writing. And the world of driving is fundamentally changing. So what will drivers do in the future? I do believe that there are going to be many driving jobs, but self-driving capability is going to change what it means. So each of these skills and the related skills are changing over time, just as the jobs change. All right. Let's go to the next slide. So skills also need some context. And candidly, this is a bit of a catch-all for some other issues that we see with trying to use skills ontologies in order to manage skills. So let's just look at a couple of examples. If we can click next a couple of times. One example is going to be one we just used before. Around context. See if we're having a slide advance trouble again here. All right, I'll go ahead and explain. So one of the issues of context relates to words such as Java. Thank you. Java is both a word for coffee and a programming language. So I do love this example, and it can be very confusing if you see the word without the context. A little more subtle, I think, is a word such as planning. It's a very common skill, one that people often describe that they can do very well. But if you think about it, it has a very different context depending on the role you're talking about. For example, if you're an event planner, being a planner means that you are very good at communications and managing budgets and vendors. But if you are a building manager, being a planner may mean that you're good at managing architecture diagrams and managing government permits. If you are a software engineer, planning may mean that you're good at managing code delivery, and you're very good at managing release cycles. So planning is actually a different skill depending on the context. So all of these reasons, frankly some others as well, are why the approach to skills requires a capability matrix. This is why we have now done this at Eightfold. We can go to the next slide and then move on in about 10 seconds here, DJ. We have a capability matrix based on a self-learning model across many different data sources, which automatically develops the relationships, context, and matching that underlie what people can do in a job today. If we can go to the next slide, we can very quickly see how our AI works. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is just a representation. Our deep learning AI, this is also called neural networks, if you've ever heard that term, can calculate what someone is likely to do next in their career. We feed this data model with a large amount of data in order to reach this goal. What is someone likely to do next in their career? So the data that we're able to use to do this is data on more than 1.2 billion profiles. And a profile can be virtually any format. It could start with the resume. You can also think of it as a social media, professional profile, or another version as well. And we have seen more than 1.2 billion of these profiles. So a substantial portion of the working world, and in particular of professional profiles in the world's workforce. In addition, we have from our corporate partners billions of screening results and interview hours for which we've seen the results and can calculate what makes someone successful in a job. The deep learning model looks at the underlying skills and the underlying characteristics that predict that without bias. We further feed in public data sources that provide additional context. Public data sources, a good way to think about that is these are the kinds of things that a recruiter might know that are not on a profile. For example, which colleges are well regarded for a certain specialty, or which regions are likely to commute to other regions, things like that, which are contexts that we want the AI to know as well. The deep learning is able to combine all this information and create these predictions in order to produce some of these kinds of outcomes. So when you actually have this capability matrix that underlies this deep learning AI, there's a number of things that you can start to do. So what can we actually do to manage workforce at scale? We can go to the next slide. All right, so what can we actually do when we can manage workforce skills at scale? So let's just see some examples of this. I'm going to illustrate these with images from our technology, which will give an example of what this means to have deep learning AI. So if we can go to the next slide, one thing we can do with deep learning AI is find candidates who can actually do the job. You're a hiring manager or a recruiter. You can use skills to define what you're looking for in a candidate. So now setting skill requirements is not an afterthought, but it becomes the source of action for how you're looking for those candidates. This is going to be far more flexible and nuanced than a keyword search, and you can even understand what related skills you may want to consider seeking in the job. In this example, we're looking for an experienced architect we want to hire to work on a piece of HR software, and there's a number of skills that we've selected that we want to actually look for. So if we go to the next slide, we can evaluate candidates based on these skills. This is, I think, the real core of it here, because we not only understand the skills that we're looking for, but because we have a capability matrix, we can understand exactly what skills the individual candidates have. This is a partial example of a candidate profile viewed in the context of this experience architect job. This person is a strong match for the requirements. And in addition to their general qualifications, I can see how this person matches my skill needs. So for example, I see 3 validated skills. The AI is very confident that this person has these skills because they've described these skills in their profile, and based on their work experience, we can prove, yes, this person definitely has these skills. We can validate that. But more than that, because we have a full capability matrix, we can also see 4 likely skills. Based on everything else we know about this person, we can predict with a high degree of likelihood that they have these other skills today. Even though they have not said so directly, I have these 4 skills. But we can find that based on the full matrix, seeing the jobs that they've had and their experience in those jobs. So I have much more confidence as a hiring manager that this person is a strong match. Still interesting, I can also see that there's a skill to validate. This is a skill that I required for the job, and the person claimed that they have it. But the matrix doesn't see enough information to really verify if this person can actually do the job. So as an interviewer, using this information, you might want to dig in to this graphic arts skill. Make this a focus of part of your interview. However you're going to determine it, this is what the AI is suggesting that you focus on to make sure this person really is the right person for the job. The AI, after all, does not replace human judgment. It just provides guidance. And finally, there's a missing skill. This is a skill that I want for the job, but the AI says it's actually doubtful this person has this skill based on everything we know about this individual and hundreds or thousands of other individuals who have similar career paths. So this becomes an incredibly powerful recruiting capability to use skills at scale and a capability matrix to understand what someone can do. All right, let's jump to the next one and see another wrinkle on this, which I just want to focus on and filling in the blanks because I think this is, frankly, very cool to actually see this in action. This is a couple of call-outs from a very common situation. You may get a resume or see a profile in which someone lists their job title, their dates, and the company they worked for, and that's all the information they provide. And based on this information, the capability matrix knows what likely skills that individual has because it's seen other people with that job title at that company at that period of time. So at the top, we see an example where someone who worked at a large consulting firm, based on the work that they did, here is a list of skills that person is very likely to have gained with a very high degree of confidence. So we can fill in the blanks for them. And an example dear to my heart at the bottom, which is more educational. I say dear to me because this is a school that I attended, the Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business. And based on this person's current education, we are very confident that this person has these 10 skills. So if I am interested in hiring an MBA, I can see here are skills this person has learned in the educational program. So this is an inside view, but let's go to the next slide and look from an outside view. Instead of looking at the point of view from the recruiter or the hiring manager, what does a candidate see? And we can show candidates exactly why they should apply for a job with this capability matrix. So turning this around, I know a little small on your screen, but here's a view of what a candidate would see if they can put themselves into the career site, which shows them what skills they have that match the job. So this is incredibly transformational because it shows candidates exactly which job they should apply for and exactly why, which is especially important if the volume of applications is rising, as I know it is for many organizations right now. And it sets the candidate and the organization up for greater hiring success because they're more likely to apply for the right job, and more likely to have a good experience from the very first interaction with your company. I do think this is a killer app. This is pretty cool. If you're so inclined, you can try this out for yourself. Just head over to our careers site at careers.eightfold.ai And you could put in your resume and see if you match any jobs and look at this experience for yourself. Doesn't mean you need to apply. We won't keep your resume if you don't apply for a job. Just a chance to actually try it for yourself. Let's go to the next slide and let's see another use case. You can use this technology, you can use this capability to give employees the tools to move it internally as well. And the user interface is different, more appropriate for an internal experience, but it works the same way as that career site. We understand what an employee can do, and we can apply that against the internal roles available and open to employees and show that employee exactly what skills they need to be a fit for the job. So in this case, which I actually took from my own internal version of the Eightfold technology, I matched to a senior product marketing manager role that we were hiring for, and I could see exactly which skills I had to apply for this job. So this is very interesting. It gives me the confidence to apply for the job if I'm so inclined, and also to learn additional skills if I would like to become a stronger match. And this gives a natural segue to the next capability this gives on the next slide. We can give employees the tools to grow. So if I'm missing a skill that I need to move to the next job in my career, I can identify the skill, first of all, understand what skills I need to move to the next step in my career, and then I can also be presented with mentors who can help me learn that skill and courses, learning and development opportunities that can teach me that skill as well. I could do this as an exploration, simply out of curiosity, or I can do this as a actual directed path toward getting ready for that next step in my career, whether that's a classic promotion or whether that's a lateral move or even just something I'm interested in doing. Because this can not only apply to a full-time job, but also a project or a part-time gig. And this kind of information and capability just requires that capability matrix. It requires that underlying graph of skills across multiple dimensions that is constantly evolving to understand the latest needs for roles and for skills. I want to give just one more example in the next slide about how to benchmark for the future. And that is one more example. With this kind of skills information, the organization can benchmark as a whole against peer companies and see where the organization is missing skills in a department or in a team, typically within a functional area, not across the whole company, just because that involves so many disparate kinds of functions. Now, this is a real example, and it is something of the inverse of the last slide, where an employee is considering their future within the organization. Here, the organization is considering the future of the employees. And with this kind of information, I can understand where I may have an excess of skills compared to my peer organizations, where I would like to grow further skills within the organization, and where skills are changing overall within the organization today. So this is just a quick hit of some of what you can start to do with the capability matrix. It actually becomes the fundamental basis to not just make skills something that you are talking about as an organization, as many organizations do, but to actually make skills actionable. I do want to give just a couple more examples of this and apply this, because I know this is a question people always ask. You're talking about this, but is this actually working today? So if we can jump to the next slide and then very quickly jump on ahead, I do want to give 3 quick use cases that show how we're doing this today. And these are live use cases, live examples. So first, an example around recruiting and hiring. I mentioned a few minutes back that with this capability matrix powering a career site, you can show a candidate which jobs best fit their skills and potential and really give them the confidence to apply for a job. So this is technology that's live today and being used by many large organizations, including a large airline that serves 40 million plus passengers last year, tens of thousands of employees across the globe. So they do have a very complex hiring environment that meets a lot of stringent national requirements. And once they started using AI to hire and started using this skills-based approach, they did see some significant benefits at that career site end from the hiring perspective. Because candidates could see which job they could apply for and had the confidence to apply, they started to receive a 4 times increase in candidate volume. I would say at least 4 times the volume, because they actually had multiple target systems in the past, some of which they were not being able to keep good metrics for. And by the way, that 4x volume was pre-pandemic, so it is potentially even higher today. But this is not an impact based on the fact that people are now looking for work in the airline industry, which has been impacted so unfortunately and so severely. And because the candidates were applying for the right jobs, you would expect the higher applicant volume would result in lower candidate quality, but this was actually not the case because these candidates were applying for the right jobs. So at every single stage of the hiring process, at the screening stage, the interview stage, second round interview, every single one of these stages, they had an increased conversion rate. And ultimately, at the candidate offer stage, 36% higher conversion to candidate offer. Every single stage was more efficient. That's because every single candidate was better fit for the job that they were applying for, and so they were better quality candidates. And there was more confidence from the hiring manager that they were looking at better quality candidates as well. On the back end, for the recruiting team, huge benefits as well in terms of efficiency. The recruiter spent 60% less time on screening. And with other efficiency gains from the technology, they were spending 50% less time overall per requisition. So 50% fewer recruiter hours per job filled. One other wrinkle here before I want to move on to the next example. This career site, this front end, by focusing on skills, results in greater diversity of hire because everyone is able to now focus on what people can do rather than focusing on who that person is, which is simply not relevant. How many studies have shown that it doesn't matter whether someone is 20 years old or 50 years old, whether someone's male or female or another gender, whether someone is black or white or another racial characteristic, it doesn't matter. People have the same ability to do a job. And we found for another client using this capability, they were able to increase the hiring of women by 19% when they measured it before and after. So we're very bullish on how this is going to impact organizations toward their diversity and equity goals. All right, so let me give one more example here. Now looking at the internal capability, let me give a retention example with the financial services company. So we do work with a number of large financial services firms, and we did have one that had a planned reduction in force earlier in the year. So they were planning to reduce headcount by about 3,000. Unfortunate situation, but unfortunately it does happen, and it is frankly common right now. But they did have Eightfold in place for internal mobility. And since this is a large organization, even though they had a reduction in force, they still had thousands of open jobs elsewhere in the business at the same time. Before proceeding with any layoff, it's typical for this company, as for many other thoughtful companies, to try to help each of these affected individuals find another internal position. But in the past, that had been a manual search process that required a lot of staff time, and their benchmark was 19%. In past reductions in force, 19% of those individuals could be retained in a different job. But this time around, they were able to use skills and automation to match each employee against all open roles automatically. So the hardest part of the process became automatic. And they were actually able to immediately show people other jobs that they could do or could easily learn to do and give them the option of choosing to get to that job. And the result was 58% retention against the 19% benchmark, which represents 1,700 affected lives. And this is, I think, a very important example why this skills-based capability and why capability matrix is something that organizations need. Because not only was this the right thing to do for the people involved, it saved the organization at least $40 million. And I think in the long run will have a positive impact on the culture and on the productivity of the individuals affected. This is the kind of thing that we really want to see organizations doing as they think about skills at scale and working with capabilities. And this really does work at large scale. I do want to share just one more slide before getting to your questions. And thank you for the questions already. We'll get to them in a minute. But if you do have questions, would love to get them. So please do get out your keyboard. Just one more slide, if we could go to the next one, to illustrate why this is so important. And I do have to share this brag because we were recently selected by the U.S. Department of Labor as the winner of the Veterans Employment Challenge. And this is very important to us. Like many of us, we're very proud of our U.S. military veterans. Veterans learn so many skills in the armed forces. And really, this is a group of individuals who have truly pursued the most that they can be themselves, the most skills and capability that they can develop for themselves. But U.S. military veterans often don't get to fully apply these skills in the private sector. Maybe looked at another way, U.S. military veterans often do not earn the income, they don't earn the wages that they ought to earn based on the skills that they've learned in the armed forces and find themselves in lower income career tracks after their service. So this challenge was designed to overcome this previous limitation, and the Department of Labor was looking for an ability to apply skills from the military sector to the private sector and do that at scale. And they selected Eightfold to do this. Really, as we were told, it wasn't even close, because this is precisely what the capability matrix is designed to do. So we're extremely proud that this technology is going to enable more than 200,000 military veterans each year transition to civilian employment that is not only available to them, but that takes advantage of what they've learned to do, that hopefully motivates and excites them to keep growing and advancing their career, and lets all of us not only say and how much we are proud of the work that they've done for us in their military careers, but actually give them some of the outcomes in their careers subsequently that they deserve. So with that, thank you all for the questions. I would love to answer some questions that we've received. So let me see here. To address some questions that we received here, please do keep sending me your questions. We'll go up until near the top of the hour, and I'll answer as many questions as I can. So first, we got a question about job descriptions. Is a job description still important to define the skills for a role? This is really interesting. You know, job descriptions and resumes are old tech, right? The reality is that it's impossible to completely get rid of old tech instantly. I'm sure job descriptions and resumes will still linger for many years. And what we can do today is interpret job descriptions and resumes. A different type of AI, a natural language processing, can read the language on that resume, and the AI will then interpret, identify the skills information that's on those resumes in order to identify the skills information. Using our technology, it actually it's not strictly necessary to write a job description anymore. In practice, especially in the United States, we do see that our clients still will write a job description. We also see that people tend to no longer focus on it. They'll focus on these skills instead. So hopefully that answers that question. We got a question that asks if someone is overqualified. Does this identify if they're overqualified? Well, it won't specifically flag someone as overqualified. My own concern about that is that would be a potential form of bias. Someone who is highly qualified for a job will tend to show as less of a strong match, because the job that they may be overqualified for would not be what's next in their career. It may have been what's earlier in their career. So we would not expect that that person would be hired for that job. I think what we would usually see is that person would show as a partial match in that situation. We're not going to, however, we're not going to say overqualified. That's not a flag we're going to specifically say. All right, so let me see a couple other questions. I'll answer one here, a little lighter. Why do we call ourselves Eightfold? Well, Eightfold is inspired by the theory in Theravada Buddhism, actually, the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, I think, it's a wonderfully symbolic theory for how we think about people each finding their own path toward what matters to them. We want to use this technology to give people the power and confidence to define their own career path, whatever that may be. So for us, Eightfold is aspirational about how we want to impact the world. Our mission is for everyone to find the right career for them, everyone in the world. And we do think that is achievable. Okay, I'll say it. We're a Silicon Valley company. We don't set small goals for ourselves. We did get a question here about customers in different countries. We do have customers located around the world. We have customers North and South America, Europe, and Asia. We have, in addition to the companies that are based in those locations, we have customers hiring in many additional countries. So a company based in North America may hire around the world. So whatever country you're interested in most cases, we are working within that country today. For questions about, we have a couple of questions about following up. We will follow up with you after the webinar. So if you're interested in learning more about your specific situation or to talk more on a commercial basis, we'll be happy to follow up with you as well. Question about the languages that we work in. Does this work follow up to the country question? Yes, this technology does work in multiple languages. Today we're deployed in, it's currently 14 languages. There's no magic to that number. That's just the requirements our clients have had to date. We do add new languages as they're needed. That process is something which typically only takes about 4 weeks. The secret there is that the underlying capability matrix is language agnostic. So it understands that a skill is a skill across any language. The language itself is actually not relevant to the skill. So it can understand that context. Once it's seen enough information in a different language, effectively the AI learns that language. Honestly, I think that's incredibly cool. I have seen it work very well. So a question about coming up with 1.4 million skills. How do we make sure that those skills stay up to date, and how do we know when skills change or become redundant? Well, the short answer there is that's not some number that we came up with. That's the reflection of the reality that we see. What the deep learning model is able to do is take all the information that it has, structure that information, and target a goal. The goal we're looking at is tell us what matters toward predicting what someone is going to do next in their career. And when we apply that, I say that the mathematical capability that underlies that requires a lot of PhDs and some exceptional engineering and mathematics talent. What they're able to then do with this model is the model then has determined there are about 1.4 million unique skills. And as that information changes, we see those changes over time, which is why I highlight that we're not saying hire this person. We're simply giving we're giving some guidance. And you as the human decision maker decide whether you agree with it or not. We see that human decision makers agree somewhere between about 91 and 93% of the time, depending on the exact portion of the technology they're using, depending on the use case. That's a very high benchmark for AI. And if someone disagrees, the AI learns from that as well and says, all right, this was not the right recommendation, so we'll take that back into the model and tune it further based on the human decision making. Well, fundamentally, this is not terribly different from how your Google search engine works. When you put something into Google, Google will tell you, here are the results that are most relevant to you, just like we're going to say, here are the jobs that may be most relevant to you. And if you click on the first result and stay on that site, then Google learned, okay, yeah, that was the right result. Google got it right. But if you don't click on that first result, or you click on it and immediately go click the backspace, Google will think, you know, maybe this was not the right information. It's going to tune itself a little differently next time. All right, so let me see a couple more questions. I got a question about someone said, I uploaded my resume to your career site and was given a good match to the role. What is the scale here? So we will show people on the public-facing career site, we'll show that they're a strong match, a good match, or not a match. Really, we'll just show that there's no match. The reason we do that is we want to provide appropriate guidance without without making it confusing. I always welcome feedback on this. So that's a slightly different experience from the internal recruiter where we're going to give more detail, same underlying AI, but a different level of detail. As the candidate, we simply want to show you, here's the jobs that you should apply for and show you the reasons why, but without having you think, well, this one, I'm like a 78% match versus a 77% match. Those are so close. From that perspective, you should just apply for that job. So that's why we use those kinds of descriptions on the front end. So question about integration. This technology does integrate to your existing applicant tracking system and human resource information system. It also integrates to learning and development systems and vendor management systems as well. So specifically for the quote-unquote big three enterprise technologies, Workday, Oracle, and SAP, we do have multiple clients for each of these integrations in place. So we have well-established frameworks for creating a bi-directional integration with these technologies that meet requirements for privacy, such as GDPR, and that meet requirements for security as well. In particular, I mentioned SAP. We are a SAP certified endorsed app, but we do integrate cleanly with these other technologies as well. Let me see what else. What else do we have? We did get a question about where we're focused in the future. Are we focused on recruitment and mobility, or are we moving into other areas? So we are trying to focus on career. So recruitment and talent mobility are heavy areas of focus for us. One of the areas where we're increasingly moving is toward learning to help individual employees make greater use of learning resources that matter to them. I want to point out that that's important to have self-service. One of the reasons why we see our approach working is it is employee self-service. A lot of employees like to log in and do this outside of work hours when they may be curious. Having this kind of career management as part of a review every 6 months with your manager, for example, is just less effective and less actionable for employees. We don't specifically think about performance management as much. That's not something we've thought about doing. Our clients do keep using their current performance management system that they have in place. We have not currently built an open API for our technology in response to that question. We take just about one more here, so we have a few minutes at the end for you to pass to your next meeting. One last question, how does a company build jobs in our technology? We use a process called job calibration. Typically makes the most sense if we demonstrate this to you in a managed session, just so you can see how it works. And in this process, you as a recruiter or hiring manager will define the requirements that you want for the job. You'll define the skills, you'll define the job title that you want to hire for. You'll look at some ideal candidates, say I would love someone, if I could just hire one more person like the best person on my team, that would be fantastic, and so we can use that to help create the guidance. Once you have that job calibration built out, we can then immediately show you the candidates who you may want to consider. As well, this also gives you an ability to write the job description. We provide some guidance on that. But as I mentioned before, the job description, strictly speaking, is optional. How it's usually required for compliance purposes. And hopefully as we keep moving down the road with capability matrices and AI, perhaps hope we will get to the point where the job description will truly be resigned to the dustbin of history. And perhaps someday our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will look at a job description and a resume on the wall of a museum next to the prints from Leonardo da Vinci and say, gosh, the world really was different in the past. All right, well, thank you all so much for your attention today. We are really glad you spent an hour with us, and if you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to add me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer your questions directly, and we'll also follow up with you directly and are happy to answer any further questions. So DJ, thank you so much. Thank you all again for your time.